Yes, moving on to general discussion and updates, beginning with our Proposition 14 discussion. Beginning with a request for support of Proposition 14. We're going to be joined here on the agenda. You see Elizabeth Hansel, but Brandon has kindly offered to speak on her behalf and on behalf of the support group for Proposition 14. And Brandon is the Chief of Staff for Abel Maldonado, is that correct?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say Senior Advisor. I'm not Chief of Staff, but everything, I guess.
All right, Brandon. Well, I'll give you the floor.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for meeting today. I'm here in Como Valley, California. Just pulled over off the side of the road at a park. It looks beautiful today. Hopefully, it's nice down there. So what we're talking about is Proposition 14, which is known as the open primary of the top two. And essentially what it does, which I'm sure you guys are all somewhat familiar with, it changes the way we elect folks for Congress, Assembly, State Senate, and statewide offices. And what it does is essentially it just changes it to the system that we have for electing our supervisors, our sheriff, our city council members, and so forth. And what it does is it allows for the best two candidates, regardless of party or anything else, to move on from the primary to the general. And what it also does is it allows everybody to actually to be able to vote in a primary. Right now, the way our system is set up, it disenfranchises over 3.5 million declined-to-state voters. Declined-to-state voters are not allowed to vote in a Republican or Democrat primary unless they request or ask for a ballot. And that option isn't given to them, they have to ask for it. So that would be one of the major changes, is that you'd have a higher percentage of people turning out to vote in a primary. Typically right now we have a situation in the state where a very small minority in each major party is electing the person who, or the individual who wins their given primary. And in a lot of districts in the state, because of our gerrymandering, whoever wins the primary is going to be your elected official, no matter who faces them from the other party in the general. So what Proposition 14 does is it increases voter participation, and what the main advocate of it, which of course is Senator Maldonado, believes, is that we're going to end up with more pragmatic, open-minded, reasonable politicians in Sacramento, because they'll have to represent more than just a small, narrow group that elect them in the primary. They'll have to represent more than 50 plus 1% of the people that will decide who they are in the general. So what that would mean in your district, you would likely have two Democrats running against each other in the general, but the Democrat that would be most likely to win in the general would be the one that would get support from declined states, independents, and Republicans, and would probably be more business friendly. And I think that's a good thing.
You've had 5 minutes. How do you want to go, Brian?
I'd like to open up to questions for Brandon.
Go ahead.
Okay. Any questions?
Maybe we ought to hear from Michael.
Do you want to do?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Get both on the table. It's good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for having me. First of all, I want to respond to what we heard. It's not an open primary, it's a top two primary. The open primary is what California had in '98 and 2000. Open primary meant every voter could vote in every party's primary. And then have everybody from each party advance to the November election. This eliminates the right of all parties in California to have candidates on the general election ballot. It's not an open primary. They're playing on the same name that they had before. It should be called top two. Number two, it's not like supervisorial or sheriff races. Partisan primaries have an entirely different dynamic in our races. It's simply not by comparison like those. Three, there's no guarantee you're going to get the best two candidates. We could have vote splitting among numerous candidates and have people advancing with 10, 15, 20% of the vote onto November. It actually limits choice in November rather than increasing it by limiting just to only two candidates. The decline of state voters in California already can vote in the major party primaries. Both parties already allow them to do that. And it's not true that necessarily party primaries have low turnout. Where there's competitive race, there's high turnout. Now, in terms of where I'm coming from on this, I believe this is a Trojan horse to be an incumbency protection program. And the places where the top 2 is in place around the country shows that that's the case. First, again, as I mentioned before, it takes away the right for all parties to be on the ballot. Just in 2004, we had 67.5% in California who voted for all parties to be able to have candidates on the ballot. 2, in the primary, candidates don't have to list their party affiliation. Now we'll actually have people on the ballot. You won't know if they're Republicans or Democrats, let alone Greens or Libertarians. Third, it will prevent independents from going ahead and qualifying for the November ballot after the primary is over. That's one of the backstops in our current political system. If issues come up in the primary, there aren't candidates to represent it. Now you can get signatures and qualify. That'll take you away. Where has the top 2 been in place? Washington State passed it. They had it in 2008. Of 139 partisan candidates, only 1 incumbent out of 139 lost in the primary. And only 5% of those 139 races did candidates from both the major parties advance to the general election. So essentially, we had the same thing in Washington State. A candidate from the Democrats and Republicans going to the general election, except for you eliminated all the other smaller parties. But what happens then? When you have the dynamics happening earlier in the primary, let's think back to the time when California had this with the recall a couple of years ago. Everybody thinks, oh, maybe a liberal Democratic district like this is going to have 2 Democrats, or a Republican district is going to have 2 Republicans. What we saw in the recall is Schwarzenegger intimidated and extorted all the other Republicans, except for McClintock, who was too stubborn, out of the race because he was afraid that the Republicans were going to split the vote, and that was going to allow Bustamante to get in. What's going to happen in this sort of situation is you aren't going to see a whole lot of people from both parties getting in because of the danger in the primary. Let's say that in Santa Monica, there were 7 Democrats and only 1 Republican running. There would be pressure inside the Democratic primary for the Democrats to drop out lest they split all of their votes and the, quote, best Democrat or whomever doesn't advance because they've split their votes. 30% goes to the Republican, the other 70% is split over 10 candidates. So instead what's going to happen is there's going to be more pressure for the candidate that raises the most money early to push out the other people so they don't split the vote in the primaries. That ends up making the choice happen earlier to the people who have the most money, where currently in our partisan primaries, if you want to challenge the incumbent, you can go ahead, run a grassroots campaign, try and beat them, even if you don't have big money, and you don't bear the brunt then of costing your party the race in November the way this would squeeze people out. They also say this is going to make the state be governed better. In '98 and 2000, the 2 years that we had the blanket primary system here, which they call open primary, when we got to the 2000 legislature, when all the state senators and assembly members were elected by a similar system to this, we had one of the most contentious legislatures we had, and that's the legislature that took us from a big surplus in California to the deficit, which led to Gray Davis being recalled afterwards. And then third, this is not only going to take minor parties off the ballot in November, which, by the way, the women's right to vote, the 40-hour work week, etc., came from smaller parties who had a chance to raise issues and then were picked up by larger parties. But the way that minor parties stay in the ballot in California, one of the 2 ways is getting a small percentage of the vote in the statewide race. Since the minor parties won't be on the ballot anymore in the statewide races, there's going to be gone. So in the end, it favors incumbents, it favors early big money, it eliminates diversity, and none of the things that they say in terms of actually changing incumbents has actually happened. Oh, Louisiana, the well-governed Louisiana, is the other state where they have something like this.
Brandon, do you want to come in and comment on Michael's comments?
There's so much to comment on.
It's your opportunity, sir.
And to rebut. Let me start with the issue of other minor parties. There's nothing that prohibits minor parties from having a candidate or running them in this system. What will happen in the end, though, is the top 2 best candidates, irregardless of party, will make it to the general. Now, the argument that someone made, which was just made here earlier, was that this would eliminate third parties. Well, okay, how many Green Party assembly members or senators or congressional members do we have? Or independent, for that matter, or libertarian? None. The last time we had a Green member or a third-party candidate who actually won an assembly race was Audie Bach in 1998 out of Berkeley. So that I think is better representation than the Peace and Freedom, Green, or any of the other parties that were being defended here have ever had. Actually, this system would actually I think in the long run, help them get maybe a candidate or two elected to the state legislature. Second, the contention that things are so great right now and that our system doesn't need radical change, especially the way we elect elected officials, to me is almost laughable. I mean, I don't know where the individual who just spoke has been, but if he saw the problems that we've had trying to pass a budget, the problems that we've had in the state trying to fix any major problem, has been locked up by partisan gridlock on both sides. The far left and the far right have traditionally prohibited and stopped any sort of real reform or any change that we could have to move this state forward. I mean, can you imagine a system where we have people who are elected and elected by a majority of people in their district, not a small minority, and actually come together and move forward with positive legislation and move forward with passing budgets on time, move forward with solving, creating jobs and doing things that make sense in the state and working towards common sense solutions that you at the chamber always do. Can you imagine a legislature that is business friendly? Well, the current system we have now, that is not the case. So the individual who spoke before me, if thinks it's going to be any better the way it is now, I think they're sorely mistaken. We also had something back in the 60s called cross-filing. And we had it better in the legislature, which is similar to what we have now, similar to what is being proposed here. And I think that government worked a lot better than the government we have in Sacramento today. God, there's so many things to... there's a lot of defense of the status quo, and then the state of Louisiana's primary system. That was, David Duke. That's what the opposition been using a lot. They also forget to mention Bobby Jindal, who was elected under a similar system as well, who I think a lot of conservatives like. Anyways, I think that there are a lot of red herrings that were stated earlier. I think the bottom line is. A large number of groups and coalitions, including the California Chamber of Commerce among them, who support this reform and who believe this election initiative will, one, increase voter participation, two, provide us with elected officials who are reasonable, pragmatic, and who want to solve California's problems and get rid of the partisan laws that we have in Sacramento that have prohibited us from moving forward as a state.
Brandon, thank you. What I'd like to do now, we've heard your position and Michael's position and the groups. I've seen them writing these wonderful questions. So shall we start the question and answer?
Sure.
Who's first? Tom Larmore.
I think a lot of this is speculation about whether you're likely to end up with a better or more collaborative legislature. I mean, one thing that seems obvious to me is the point Michael made, which is it's going to make it very, very difficult for smaller parties to get on the ballot. But I think that's the only thing that seems almost guaranteed to happen. I guess my question is that this is being proposed as a way to try to break the tension in the legislature and get people who are more moderate who will work together. Whether that ends up being pro-business, I don't know. But I'm just interested in what else there is out there to try to accomplish this. Because when we had cross-filing, as was mentioned, or open primary, which we had for a while, I'm registered in a party that's in a distinct minority here in Santa Monica. But that enabled me to look at Democrats who were running and one of whom was most likely to win, and see whether there was someone who I thought was more moderate. So if we don't do this, what else do we do? Brandon first, then Michael.
Well, I think if this does not, well, right now, by the way, the polling shows, our internal polls showed over 70% support, which included in the high 60s among all parties and almost up to close to 80% among independents who support the top tier of the primary. What we do if this doesn't pass, well, you've heard a lot of talk about a constitutional convention and a part-time legislature. I think those two things are going to be definitely front and foremost at the top of the table, but you know, how long is that going to take in terms of a constitutional convention to come together and to do the things that would be involved with that to make some sort of changes to get this state operational again? I mean, you know, I hear some folks who don't want the open primary, and the reason why they don't want the open primary is for some reason they think the system we have in place is great, and it's not. If it was, then we wouldn't be in the difficult situations we've been in this state for the last decade. You know, Governor Schwarzenegger came in, and a lot of people thought he was going to blow up the boxes and reform the government, reform the state, and he failed to do so because the legislature just would not let him do it. The next governor, if we don't get this reform passed, is going to have that same problem. It doesn't matter who it is. They're not going to be successful. Ray Davis was broken by this legislature. So if we don't pass this reform, then I don't know what we're going to end up with. I do know that things are not going to get better, and I do disagree completely that somehow, you know, one of the interesting things is, I'm a Republican. The interesting thing is to hear some of my Republican friends who are adamantly against this, but then again, they're on the far right, and they're the ones who benefit from the way things are screwed up now, who are defending the Green Party, the Peace and Freedom Party. They would never do that. They didn't care before, and now all of a sudden they do. I mean, it's a false argument. And frankly, all the other parties will be represented in the primary process. And if they recruit a good enough candidate, that person could end up in the next round in the general election among the top two. And like I said, I can see instances in the state in certain areas where those parties do have some semblance of strength. That you can have a Libertarian running against a Republican. You can have a Green running against a Democrat. That definitely can happen. It's never going to happen now. I mean, they're on the ballot now. They get 1% of the vote. Who cares? Okay,
Brandon, we need to give Michael a chance to. Because my question was more directed to him anyway.
Yeah, much shorter answer. I came to all of you last summer as a supporter of the Constitutional Convention. The Constitutional Convention process, which frankly is going to come back again for 2012. As organizers, we weren't able to get on the ballot this time. I believe we will come back for 2012. Unlike this effort, which had no public discussion or drafting whatsoever, but was a move extorted by the need to have 2/3 on the budget by Senator Maldonado to put it on the ballot with no process whatsoever, a constitutional convention can consider the range of democratic reforms that our state should be talking about, and not only come up with something well, but the process of getting there will engage more people with the real options before us. All the smaller parties in California are against this, so it's nice that our friend here is telling us that it's good for us, but all the smaller parties have come out against it, and we didn't hear anything, even if you don't care about the smaller parties at all. And most people don't, and that's the way it is. Even if you don't care. The experience in Washington State was that it protected incumbents, and the experience when we had it in California is we had one of our most contentious legislatures that took us from surplus to deficit in 2 years.